So I have a lot of awkward moments. There's a couple of reasons for that. Some of it is that I really love bad puns. Another reason is that I'm the son of immigrants. My parents came here from India right before I was born. They landed in Cleveland, which is where I was born. We like to joke I'm a Cleveland Indian. That's an example of the bad puns earlier I was talking about. But we moved to Denver when I was about 1.5, and I grew up in Colorado, going mostly to very white schools. And this led to some awkward moments. I remember coming home from school one day in first grade, and my mother asked me the same question that she would ask me pretty much every day, which is, what did you learn in school today? And I said, I learned that I'm Jewish. She said, what are you talking about? I said, well, my friend Angelica came up to me at recess today, and she said, Teju, are you Christian or are you Jewish? And I said, I don't know, how can you tell? And she said, well, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? And I thought, I'm pretty sure someone would have told me about that by now, if that were true. So I don't think so. And she said, great, you're Jewish. And I was like, cool, we went back to the monkey bars. It was great. I soon realized that I had to learn a lot about Christianity and Judaism because I lived in an environment full of Christian and Jewish people. But I also discovered that that same thing didn't necessarily go the other way around because there's not lots of Indians or Hindus all over the place, at least in the places that I grew up. And this led to more awkward moments. I don't know if you guys have the same conversations over and over again when you meet new people. They might say, hey, what do you do? And you say, I'm a doctor. And they say, oh, wow, you must be really smart. You must work really hard. You say, yeah, I get that a lot. That conversation for me would be, hey, nice to meet you. Where are you from? And I would say, oh, Denver. They'd say, but where are you from? Which really is meant to say, why are you brown? And I knew what they were going for. I never quite give it to them, though. I'd say, oh, I was born in Cleveland. And they'd say, yeah, but why, where's your family from? Finally, I would say India. And then the next thing that would happen, they'd say, do you know the Patels? I'd say, what, the Patels? They'd be like, yeah, they're this great family. They used to have me over for dinner all the time. They make really spicy food. Do you like spicy food? Anyway, yeah, they're great. I ask, okay, well, where are they? Tell me more. And they're like, oh, they're people I grew up with in Chicago. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I'll check in with them at the next meeting of all the Indians that we have. These kinds of interactions have been a very prominent part of my life, and part of the reason is that when we meet people who are different from us, we don't quite know what to do. Some part of us freaks out, and we abandon the normal confidence that we might have in engaging with new people. And so one of the questions that this has left me with is, how do we connect with people who are different from us? And perhaps this question matters now more than it ever has. Our country is more politically divided, perhaps, than it has ever been. We are seeing an alarming rate of racial violence, and we're seeing a lot of discrimination against a lot of different people. So this is a time where perhaps this question matters more than it ever has. I was taking a Lyft ride the other day. Got into the Lyft, it was snowing, not unlike today. And the driver commented on the snow, and I said, yeah, it's so surprising because only 2 days ago it was 70 degrees. And he said, yeah, and this must be extra surprising for you because there must not be snow in your country. And I was like, are you kidding again? And I said, do you mean the United States of America? And he said, no, like the country you're from. And I said, do you mean the United States of America? We're 241 years into this country's history. This is the country that promises that you do not have to look a certain way in order to be an American. And yet this still hasn't quite sunk in for us. The idea that we can look different, be different, and still be on one team has not sunk in for us. So my question now is, who is showing us the way that we can connect across divide and across difference? And some of these are regular everyday people, like my dear friend Ashley Elmblood. After the election happened, like me, Ashley was stupefied, horrified, couldn't explain what had happened and why this reality she could never have predicted came to be. She didn't know what to do. She volunteered, she went to the protests, she did all that good stuff, But it wasn't enough for her, and so she reached out to an old friend who she hadn't spoken to for 10 years, a guy she knew in middle school back in Grand Junction named James. James was in the military, and she had the suspicion that he might be of a different political persuasion than she was. So she sent him a Facebook message and said, James, I'm trying to make sense of what has just happened. And from my perspective, this is a horrifying and terrifying moment in our history. I don't know what to make sense of it. I'm looking for some guidance. I'm looking for some help. Could you offer me your perspective, which I imagine is different from mine? And James said, yeah, that'd be great, sure. He was very open to it, and they continued to engage over Facebook, eventually switched to email. They started having Skype chats, and they started talking about Trump and Hillary Clinton, but they wound up talking about gun control and health care and abortion and women's rights and immigration and every topic you could imagine. And something very surprising happened. James would say something like, I think everyone has a right to have a gun. Everyone should have a gun. And Ashley, true to her intention to simply understand, would say, tell me more. Why do you think that? And he would explain safety, protection, constitutional freedoms. And she said, well, what about someone who is a convicted felon? And he'd say, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, maybe not convicted felons. And she'd say, well, what about someone who has a proven track record of mental illness? And he'd say, oh, okay, well, maybe not someone who has a proven track record of mental illness. And pretty soon, through this clarification, they discovered that actually their position on gun control was 80% similar. They only varied on the margins. And this happened across so many different topics. It was Ashley's sincerity in asking these questions, her gentle curiosity, her true willingness to set aside the desire to be right and simply to understand James that allowed them to connect. Now they're dating. So the promise of reaching across the political aisle might be true love, but more important, what can we learn from this as we think about the moment in history that we are in? Are there other contexts where the same behavior has shown to work? A story came out in the Washington Post that some of you might have read about a gentleman named Derek Black. Derek Black is the son of Don Black, who is a founder of the white nationalist movement, the creator of the largest online forum for white nationalism in the country called Stormfront. Derek Black is also the grandson of David Duke, a known high-ranking official in the Ku Klux Klan. So he inherited the beliefs of white supremacy and white nationalism of his family. And he continued to propagate them, speaking at conferences, writing blog posts, pushing this message, rationalizing the superiority of white people. And he did this until he discovered that he was really interested in studying medieval history. The best school where he lived to go to study medieval history was New College in Florida, which was a very, very liberal college, but he enrolled there and was pretty excited to be away from home for the first time and because he had been homeschooled. When he got there, like any other college student, he really wanted to have friends and have the college experience. And he realized that if he were to be forthcoming about some of his views, he may not have such good luck making friends. So he kind of kept those to himself. And for a while, he was doing just fine. He was making friends. Everything was great until one day when the online forum of the college received more traffic than it had ever received in the history of the online forum. And it was because someone had found out that Derek Black was posting blogs on Stormfront rationalizing white supremacy. And they posted the picture of him, they posted some of his blog posts and said, this man is a white supremacist, he's on our campus, what do we do? Thousands of students responded, all fearing, all worried. They started sending him hate mail, people stopped speaking to him, no one invited him to any social events. They flipped him off from across the street. Whenever they could, they would send him death threats, violent threats. He became a social outcast in his community. One of the people who came across this whole situation was a guy named Matthew Stevenson. Matthew Stevenson is Jewish, an Orthodox Jew, wears a yarmulke, hosts a Shabbat dinner every Friday. And he considered the idea that perhaps Derek Black had never spent time with someone who was Jewish, had never spent time with someone who was black, had never spent time with someone who was homosexual. These were all people who showed up regularly at the Shabbat dinners that Derek Black hosted. So he brought up this idea with his friends who attended a Shabbat dinner. What if we invited Derek Black to our dinner? And of course, it was very contentious. People were like, why would we willingly invite a known white supremacist into our safe space, into our Shabbat? And eventually, after discussing it, they realized that the best way to address the situation was not to ignore Derek Black. It was not perhaps to confront him. Perhaps it was simply to include him. So they made a decision. Matthew sent him a text message saying, "What are you doing on Friday night?" Derek showed up with a bottle of wine. They treated him like anybody else. They didn't ask him about his blog. They didn't ask him about his views. They played board games. And they had a good time. Derek Black came back the next Friday. And he came back the next Friday. And he came back the next Friday. And for months and months, he began to attend these Shabbat dinners until everyone became friends. A white supremacist, a Jew, a person who was homosexual, a person who was black. This became a community. And slowly, they wound up having discussions about why Derek Black believed the things that he did. But because he had come to build relationships with people who were different from him, he started to reconsider his viewpoints. He started to receive their pushback. He started to be receptive to their points of view. And eventually, he published a post renouncing white nationalism. This is the power of friendship. It is not rhetoric. It is not logic. It is not data that persuades us, that moves us across divides. It is inclusion. It is invitation. It is seeking commonality. My dad says that you know you found a friend when your conversation with them isn't over. In this moment in our country's history, perhaps the greatest fulfillment of our civic purpose is not to vote, is not to protest, but is simply to ensure that our conversations with people who are not like us are far from over. Thank you.